Vice President for Global Affairs of Rutgers University, Mrs. Achebe and members of the Achebe family, Ghana's Minister for Planning and members of the Ghanaian delegation, members of the faculty, Anaja Sehene and Nananum, students, ladies and gentlemen. I'm grateful to the Center for African Studies and the Christy and Chinua Achebe Foundation of Rutgers University for the kind invitation extended to me to speak on the platform of this institution. The university was named after a man described as a benevolent patriot, Colonel Henry Rutgers, an American war hero who devoted his life to the betterment of society. Since its establishment in 1776, nearly 3 centuries ago, it has been responsible for producing many important men and women who are doing great things in their respective fields of endeavor across the world. It holds a special place too in my administration. As one of the most dynamic ministers I've had the opportunity to appoint, Hajia Halima Mahama, the Minister for Local Government and Rural Development, who is also the Member of Parliament for Narerigu Gambaga in the northeastern region, is an alumnus of Rutgers. She's doing excellent work for our country, like the moderator of our panel, Professor Abra Buzia. Distinguished tenured professor of the university, who has taken leave of her academic duties here to do national service as Ghana's ambassador to Brazil. Ladies and gentlemen, for the longest while, we Africans have bemoaned the fact that the African story is largely told by non-Africans who are unsympathetic to our traditions, have no sensibilities towards our cultures. I'm happy to be here under the auspices of the Christy and Chinua Achebe Foundation to celebrate the great African who did not stop at complaining, but set about telling the African story knowledgeably, eloquently, and beautifully. I pay homage to Chinua Achebe, the man described as the father of modern African literature, whose writings, spanning several decades, provided enough evidence of Africa's greatness and her contribution to the history of humanity. Things fall apart, no longer at ease, Arrow of God, a man of the people, and Antilles of the Savannah are amongst the novels he authored, which testify to the rich input he made to African literature and culture. The theme I've chosen to speak on, from poverty to prosperity, brings to sharp focus one of Chinua Achebe's most oft-cited quotes, and I quote, "If you don't like someone else's story, write your own," unquote. I know how irritated some get when Africa is referred to as a country instead of a continent with 54 sovereign nations. We know what the disadvantages are. We're forced to carry each other's burdens, to borrow a manner of speaking. An outbreak of Ebola in Guinea means all visitors from any country in West Africa will be suspect at all borders around the world. One bomb explosion in Nairobi would lead to travel advisory warnings being issued against travel to all countries in Eastern and Central Africa. That is the usual narrative, all of us being massed together as one whole. And yet, we also know that there is an Africa to which we all identify and which we carry with pride and sometimes with wounded pride. There's no avoiding the reality. The Africa of poverty, wars, emaciated children, and political instability that is in popular imagination. May I suggest that we stop spending our energies getting irritated about not being recognized as 54 separate countries. It is not a problem of geography we face. Ours is a problem of poverty. Throughout history and in almost all cultures, the poor tend to be seen as a mass of people, while the rich tend to be individuals. Let us work on transforming the lives of all our peoples. Then it would not matter which part of the continent we come from, we would be accorded respect. There are, of course, lots of rich people in Africa. There are lots of beautiful and imposing homes in Africa. There are some well-constructed and paved roads in Africa. And there are companies that are functioning well and competing with the best of the world. That is a story we should tell and celebrate. But there are too many of our people who have no access to the basic necessities of life. And in almost in all the 54 countries, our infrastructure deficit is too large. We need to build roads, bridges, schools, hospitals, railways, ports, houses, and provide electricity and water. And above all, we need to get our populations educated. This is not the time to get angry that the foreign media only goes to find the dark and ugly scenes and the hungry children to photograph and to video. This is not the time to complain about being portrayed in a negative light. There are too many of our young people who are still braving the hazardous journey across the Sahara and the horrors of Libya and the turbulent waters of the Mediterranean to try to get to Europe. Too many of our young people do not see a worthwhile future in Africa. It is a tall list of things we have to embark upon to make our continent an attractive place for our people and to earn the respect of the outside world. I believe it is important at this stage to remind ourselves that there is an entire nation of black people, Africans in the diaspora, who are or who should be an intrinsic part of the calculation. You may know that we have been commemorating the 400th anniversary of the start of the transatlantic slave trade, which entailed the forcible transportation in some of the most barbaric conditions of human history of millions of Africans, numbering some 20 million, from the continent to the Americas and the Caribbean as slaves, and led to the creation of the African diaspora. These people have a stake in the fate of the continent of Africa, as much as those of us who live there. Excuse me. We have learned from harsh reality that it does not matter how well they might do or prosper in their new homes, they carry the burden of the current state of Africa. Some of them might not even want to acknowledge this ancestry, but they cannot escape it. In much the same as we cannot escape them. Our destinies are irrevocably linked. To mark this dark anniversary, and as part of the commemoration, we in Ghana have declared 2019 as the year of return, in which we're laying on a special welcome to all black people in the diaspora to come home and visit. The name Year of Return is deliberately chosen to show and celebrate the triumph of the black spirit over extreme adversity. As some of you may know, the legend of the last door leading out of the slave castles to the boats that carried the captured slaves to their journeys stated, "Door of no return." By calling this the Year of Return, we're urging their descendants to make the point they have survived against all the odds and are returning home in triumph. I'm happy to say that many people have accepted the invitation, and we are playing host to large numbers who have returned to see things for themselves. The invitation is still open, not only to the end of this special year. It is open to all Africans in the diaspora to come whenever the Spirit bids them. As I've said, we have work to do to make Africa the attractive home it should be, and it's an intimidatingly tall list of things we have to do. Without doubt, the biggest obstacle to development on the continent has been instability. My country, Ghana, was the first to get independence in sub-Saharan Africa some 62 years ago and opened the way for others. Until Zimbabwe in 1980 and South Africa in 1994 marked the end of the colonial rule on the continent. Across the continent, political independence did not bring the hoped-for dividend of economic prosperity, and we're being plagued with political instability. In the past 50 years, wars and famine and military adventurism have combined to reinforce the image of Africa as a troubled continent, and we've been unable to make economic and political advances as rapidly as we should have. We became, in the words of one British Prime Minister, quote, a scar on the conscience of the world, unquote. And a huge aid industry was fabricated to keep the continent from sinking. Much of the work of United Nations agencies was concentrated on Africa, and we have kept the world busy with refugees and peacemaking activities. We did not seem to be able to get our politics right to keep our countries stable long enough to develop our economies. This state of affairs also meant that we were not able to develop the strength to withstand the adventurers that came to exploit our lands. It meant our confidence was undermined in our indigenous cultures and languages, and we stood in danger of losing our identity as a race. Every once in a while, it looked as though we were getting our act together, but there were many false dawns as each attempt at political renewal and economic regeneration failed to take off. I go back to Ghana instinctively as my example of the African experience. After decades of political instability, economic collapse and general angst, we in Ghana eventually came to a consensus with our 1992 Constitution under the Fourth Republic. That consensus has been founded on respect for individual liberties and human rights, the rule of law, the principles of democratic accountability, and the requirements of social justice. The last 26 years have been the most stable since our independence, and we can see the dividends. We're nowhere near being where we should be. We're certainly making more progress than we have ever made. We have identified the training of our human resource as the area to concentrate on in the journey of pulling ourselves out of poverty into prosperity. The emphasis is on education and skills training, and we're all agreed that that is the surest way to getting a skilled working population that can compete with the rest of the world. We've redefined basic education to include secondary education and made it free so that nobody loses out because of lack of money. We've also identified science, technical and vocational education as the areas in which to pay the greater attention and make substantial investment. That is not to say that we are ignoring the humanities, the liberal arts, for the goal of our educational system is to produce well-rounded citizens who can contribute to the advancement of our society and of its values for human progress. Unemployment is a serious problem facing all the countries on the continent, and it is the greatest source of insecurity. It is unemployment that fuels the harrowing trek by Africa's youth across the Sahara and the Mediterranean Sea. It is not likely we'll ever get the respect we crave for as long as our young people are forced to subject themselves to such indignities rather than stay at home to build our economies. I believe we all now feel keenly the paradox of Africa having all the Earth's natural resources, and yet her peoples being among the poorest of the world. Indeed, 30% of the Earth's remaining minerals are in Africa. It is also obvious that the young people are now very impatient about the rate of development. The message, therefore, is we have to find new ways of doing things to achieve the economic transformation we want. I believe that the African diaspora has a critical role to play. Many of their members have the expertise and would have the empathy to drive change far more quickly and smoothly than other people. Ladies and gentlemen, I've said elsewhere that we in Africa do not have any difficulty defining poverty. It is a daily reality that we live with, and we can see and feel improvements when they occur, long before the statisticians get around to updating their figures. Even if we did not want to, or feel it like before, current conditions in the world would and must force us to be self-reliant. There are no certainties in the world anymore, as we see yesterday's rules being overturned the next day without any embarrassment. These days, a cacophony of discordant voices appears to be the acceptable background to conducting business and even the affairs of state. It is not an easy time to find the resources needed for the rapid development that is required. It is not an easy time to be certain how to deal with traditional friends and allies or maneuver between unknown neutrals. In our current circumstances, I expect we have to rely on a Beninois proverb which says, and I quote, "You must attend to your business with the vendor in the market and not to the noise of the market," unquote. Africa cannot afford to be diverted from the problems she faces. We cannot afford to be dragged into the new quarrels and disputes that are being brewed daily. We cannot afford to. Our concerns should be on our own list of defined priorities. It means there must be peace in our land, and we must accept that instability anywhere on the African continent affects us all. It means we must accept that we cannot win the battle against poverty if there are wars and political instability. It means we have to spend Africa's riches in and on Africa. All the evidence shows that there's enough money on our continent to fund our development needs. The dispiriting part of the story, of course, is that we Africans bear some responsibility for taking these monies out of our countries and into Western countries. The report of the panel, chaired by the highly respected former South African President, Thabo Mbeki, on the illicit flow of funds from Africa, has raised the lid on what many had always suspected, but did not have the figures to support. According to the report, Africa is losing annually more than 50 billion United States dollars through illicit financial outflows. The report revealed further that between the years 2000 and 2008, 252 billion United States dollars, representing 56% of the illicit flow of funds from the continent, was from the extractive industries, including mining. Africa, as you can see, is not a poor continent. It means we should convince our young people to spend their energy and ingenuity to develop our countries and see our continent as a place of opportunities. It means our young people must acquire the skills that run modern economies. There will always be those amongst them who would want to try their luck in foreign countries. When they are skilled, they would not have to risk drowning in the Mediterranean Sea. They would be headhunted and treated with dignity. It also means we have to position ourselves well in the World Trade Order. It has been shown that countries or groups of countries with the largest share of world trade are located within regions with the highest share of intra-regional trade. Trade between African nations and regions has remained low compared to other parts of the world. With the coming into force of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, however, we look forward to a definite change in atmosphere and an increased trade between African nations. The coming into force of the AFCFTA means that Africa now has the largest free trade area since the formation of the World Trade Organization. The Continental Free Trade Area will cover a market of 1.2 billion people with a combined GDP of 3 trillion United States dollars across the 54 member states of the African Union that have signed up to the agreement. It will provide a vehicle for us to trade amongst ourselves in a more modern and sophisticated manner. It will offer a huge opportunity to exploit the abundant wealth and resources of our great continent for the benefit of all our people. And it will give us protection in how to deal with other trading blocs. Ghana has been selected by her peers to host the Secretariat of the AFCFTA. The first time in her history, she's been given the honor of being responsible for a Pan-African institution. My government is fully committed to the implementation of the AFCFTA. With a collective desire for shared prosperity, we are confident that the AFCFTA will succeed and provide a new impetus and dynamism for the rapid growth of Africa's economies and deepen the process of integration in Africa. Ladies and gentlemen, we in Africa cannot talk about prosperity without paying attention to the environment. We have a responsibility to take care of our environment. We in Africa have the most spectacular natural surroundings, grandest rivers and mountains. We dare not preside over their degradation in the pursuit of prosperity. We have minerals that the rest of the world would kill for. We have a dynamic and young population. We have the mix that will take us to prosperity. Above all, Africa, the cradle of civilization, brings humanity alive as no other continent is ever able to reach. Chinua Achebe, the man whose name we celebrate at this forum, illustrates this capacity of the African most eloquently when he wrote, and I quote, "A man who calls his kinsmen to a feast does not do so to save them from starving. They all have food in their own homes. When we gather together in the moonlit village ground, it is not because of the moon. Every man can see it in his own compound. We come together because it is good for kinsmen to do so," unquote. Yes. That is the spirit of Africa that we bring to the world. We aim to make the African continent the prosperous and joyful place it should be. I thank you for your attention.